So one of the things that a couple listeners requested was they wanted me to ask you about your take on Julian Assange. And so I'm going to ask you about Julian Assange, and I'm going to say you can also, use this question to just talk about press freedom in general as well, if you'd like.
And thank you for connecting that to press freedom in general, because that is an essential part of what we're talking about when we're talking about Julian Assange. We're talking about an assault on press freedoms. Framing is important here, and something that the corporatist, colonialist, imperialist system loves to do is to base its arguments on reframing things and redefining things so that they can then tear it down. They want to define Julian Assange in a certain way. I'm not going to acknowledge that, because I know that Julian Assange is a part of the larger effort to get out in the press certain truths that need to be made public. He's a part of that journalistic freedom that we need to have a genuinely free society. And they are torturing. They have tortured and are torturing that man because of it. And it is a multi-state action against him. But it's clearly motivated by the United States. The charges that they've trumped up against him are absolutely bogus. It's been acknowledged by other journalists that the things that he's done are things that they may have done in the course of securing information and sources and making information available to the public. He should be considered a part of that general journalistic freedom that a free society deserves to have. Instead, he has been tortured. And one of the things that sticks out to me, because law is my area, and international law is of personal interest to me. I worked in environmental law, but also in immigration law and issues that relate to cross-border legal issues. It was very remarkable to me how this man who was in the Ecuadorian embassy was a citizen of Ecuador. Suddenly, when a new administration that's aligned with the U.S. and its nefarious actions comes into power, suddenly his Ecuadorian citizenship evaporates into thin air, and they drag him out of the embassy. This is a massive violation of international law. You have a right to a nationality and to not be deprived of it unduly. They didn't give him any due process whatsoever. They just disappeared his nationality as an Ecuadorian and then had him pulled out of the embassy. These are things that should shock the conscience. And so I'm very much a part of the Free Assange movement. I'm very much full-throated in defense of journalistic freedom, including his journalistic freedoms. And I think that the people who have tortured him really need to answer for it. Those are the criminals, the people who have gotten together to torture that journalist.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because of all the misinformation that the corporate media spews. You have a lot of people that aren't making, you brought how these charges are just completely bogus. There's the connection, too, between the reason they're doing what they're doing to Chelsea Manning now is because they want to get a false confession out of her. Because I think they know how bogus this all is, but they want to come down on Julian Assange. So, well, if they can get Chelsea Manning to say that he helped her hack stuff, well, then there's our smoking gun that we can try to point to. They're not getting this false confession out of her, so they're torturing her too, which they're able to do because Obama didn't actually pardon her. He just commuted her sentence.
Exactly. And the thing is, we're talking about these two particular persons. And me mentioning what I'm about to say doesn't in any way lessen what they've gone through or the focus we should have on them. But these are a couple of persons out of many. And it's great that we're talking about them because it allows us to talk about the larger issue of journalistic freedom, of the many ways in which imperialist colonialist countries like the U.S. torture people who make essential truths that the public needs to know public. And it says to us as a society that we really need to make our sense of what democracy is more robust. If you think that showing up at the polls at a very tightly controlled and stage-managed and corporately co-opted election every once in a while means that you have a democracy, even though there's no genuine press freedom, then you're sadly mistaken. We are in the process of building a democracy because what we have at present does not measure up. And the Assange case, the Chelsea Manning case, draws a bold underline underneath that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things like we First of all, in the World Press Freedom Index, we're not even in the top 50, 50. We're not even in the top 50. And I actually think we deserve to be even lower. But, you know, it's one of those things like if other countries, which of course other countries have assaults against press freedom all the time. I'm not suggesting that they don't, but if other countries did what we did, we'd use that as a reason to bomb them.
Yeah, and speaking of that, it's always interesting when this country uses some kind of human rights argument for engaging in the unconscionable act of war against another country, when this country is one of the greatest human rights abusers in the world. Right now, over time, we're talking about countries that we're dealing with like Iran, where the US got actively engaged to squash democracy in Iran and then wags its finger at Iran for alleged human rights abuses while they're strangling the country to death with its sanctions in the middle of a global crisis. You know, it's so galling. And as a candidate for president, as a Green, my focus has to be that. My focus has to be on calling that out and in building a structure that's going to allow us to be a positive force for good, for peace, for togetherness in the world. And that begins with ending the imperialism, the colonialism, ending the military-industrial complex, bringing the big tent down on this ongoing series of wars this country engages in for profit that's causing misery across the world, ending sanctions like the sanctions happening in Iran, sanctions against Cuba. This is how we're going to build a more peaceful and a safer world.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and